not taking a break and you're sitting here, you can enjoy the fat, positive, whole music, hanging with fatties because we like each other, learning about all the fat people stuff and resources and support. Fat, positive, whole music. That's it. I don't have a full, it's not Les Mis, you know, I don't have a full thing, but get a little taste, little something. Yeah, thank you for the applause of physical applause that I see some of you giving. And also, can I just encourage you to, like, if you've been one of the folks who've been here for this whole time, just like shake it out a little bit, even if you're not going to get up and take a break, because I can't believe how fast this time went, that we've been here this long. Those of you who've been here since the beginning of the day, and it all was like so packed and engaging and went by so fast. But that means that a lot of us really sat in one place for a long time. So please, everything I'm going to say is things that you can hear me say in other places, especially at the beginning. I'm going to just do a quick recap of the video I already made for Crystal, which is on the Fat Community YouTube page. So if you need a little bit longer of a break, don't feel like you're missing everything. Turn your volume up so you can hear me while you walk around, or just feel free to miss a couple minutes and you will not feel lost or left out when you come back in. It's more important for you to feel good to stay for this last session than it is for you to, you know, like be like right in front of the screen for every second of the last session. And in modeling self-care, I'm going to go get my water that I forgot to bring into this room.
Okay, sounds great. I always find it so curious that we get turned down for surgery unless you want to have weight loss surgery, and then they can do it. Weird. Funny how that works. I literally asked my doctor at Kaiser, do you guys get a spiff every time someone has weight loss surgery? She's like, no, we don't get a bonus. I go, kind of feels like you might. She's like, no. I'm like, okay, stop asking me if I want weight loss surgery then, please. And I had a hysterectomy. They were able to manage that. In fact, when I had my hysterectomy, I was talking to my anesthesiologist. I'm like, aren't you going to lecture me about my weight? She goes, no, I do surgeries for fat people all the time. I'm like, don't you have any questions for me? She goes, no, my job is to keep you breathing. Oh, okay. All right. I was weird. It was weird. I thought I was going to get like a lesson or a little like lecture, but nothing. But I'm like, why is it so difficult then to get a new knee or to get your, gender affirming surgery? But you have hysterectomy and weight loss surgery, they're ready right away. Anyway, Tigress. Eye of the Tigress. Thank you, Tigress, for doing this, and thank you for being so flexible. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you're awesome. Everybody loves Tigress. So you have everything you need. You have the control. You have everything.
Yeah, I just realized I've never done a screen share on this particular device. So 1 second while I give it the permissions it needs and everything, and hopefully that will do what it's supposed to do. If I don't know what I'm doing, we'll just skip it.
Okay.
They're not that compelling of visuals, trust me. Yes, in fact, I don't know what I'm doing. So rather than spend the time on that, I'm just going to go ahead and I'll walk through or work my way through just a couple of the points that are in the video that I have that I already recorded for the virtual Fat Community Conference YouTube page. So maybe if Crystal or Ashley, if you could share that link. And I don't know how to make you the host again. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay. It'll just be the top right-hand corner. I won't need it again anyway.
Okay. So I just want to what I want to do today, hi everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Tigress. My handles on most things are Eye of the Tigress, letter I-O Tigress, like a female animal. My website is mostly defunct, but I'm pretty active on Instagram and on other kind of social spaces. And I am also the chair of the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I'm not officially here with my NAFA hat on, but I never really take my NAFA hat off. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And I have about 12 years of history in fat activism. In 2008, I started a nightclub event in the Oakland, California area called Full Figure Entertainment. And being sort of a public figure of plus size fashion and nightlife, and somebody who was by day a diversity educator, working with high school students around social justice and equity and inclusion issues, and with the faculty and staff around those things, it was very important to me to have some politic behind my party. And so I had an actual mission and value statement that was about what at the time I was probably still calling size acceptance, and we'll talk a little bit about that shift. But so like, just to give you a little bit of a sense of like where I come into fat activist world, if you don't already know me. Also, whenever I start with an audience that's not super familiar with me, I like to just give a little bit of personal bio, because I believe very much that your identities and your experiences inform your biases and your worldview and all of that. And so I like folks to know just some of those things about me as well. So I am a 47-year-old Black, mixed race, cisgender American female. I do still use the word American, although I understand why folks urge United Statesian as a way of not centering Americans as the only people on the continents of Americas. I grew up working class. I went away to a Seven Sisters college as one of the first in my family to go to college. So I was able to, even though I didn't come from economic privilege, have a lot of educational privilege through that elite/elitist education. And I see the question cisgender in the chat. So someone who is cisgender is someone whose gender identity matches the physiological sex that they were labeled as when they were born, and somebody looked at them and said, this is what you are. If you match that, then you're cisgender. If you don't match that, you may call yourselves trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender queer. There are a variety of terms that folks who are not cisgender use. But we say cisgender so that we're not just saying gender and those other folks, right? We don't want to make the cisgender folks the default. So that's why we have a specific term for us too, not just for the folks who identify as something other than cisgender or who are something other than cisgender. So so I grew up with that kind of gender privilege. Obviously, there's still other gender related marginalizations being a cisgender woman as well. And I am also a straight woman, so I have that kind of privilege. And, you know, I think a lot of times when we talk about privilege, we talk about it as unearned, and it's difficult to talk about education as unearned privilege because we feel like we worked really hard for that. I do think that I earned my degrees, but I did not earn the luck and blessing and being in the right places at right times to have people help me towards education, even if I didn't come from the backgrounds that usually are represented in the kinds of education that I got. So I do still consider my education absolutely an area of privilege. And I have a bachelor's degree in Black Studies and a master's degree in creative writing English. So I'm highly literate, I'm formally educated, I have some of these skills that other people don't have access to have had developed, to have been able to have developed. And so just know those things about me as I talk about all of this stuff, that those are some of the things that inform my worldview. I talk a lot about intersectionality. If you were here for Reagan during the last session, she gave some really great definition of that. But if you're not familiar with that term or you weren't here for that, intersectionality kind of refers to the ways, it's a framework that was created by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, and it refers to the ways that our various identities intersect in ways that can make managing the systems that govern our lives more difficult or less difficult for us, depending on who we are and where our identities merge. And one thing that I've experienced a lot in FAT community is that when people are unfamiliar with that term and they hear it for the first time, they think it means the ways our lives intersect as fat people. We're all fat, so we have all these things in common as fat people and the kind of oppression or marginalization we face. It's actually almost the opposite of that. It's actually intersectionality is making us think about the ways that even though we are all fat and we all have that particular marginalization in common, and of course there are degrees of privilege within that marginalization as well, even though we are all fat and we have that in common, there are in fact ways that we don't have things in common about how we interact with systems because of the biases and challenges that we face in our multiple identities. So that's like sort of the big framework of like where I'm coming from as I approach things in fat activism, in fat studies. And I'm also just like, I'm a nerd. I'm a geek and I'm a nerd. So in all the broadest definitions of those things, I like the academic stuff. I like the literary stuff. I like the intellectual stuff. I also really like storytelling outside of academic settings. And so one of the things that you'll see as I talk a little bit about history is I do a lot of collection of storytelling. Am really interested in people's experiences over the 53 years of the organized fat acceptance movement, fat activist, fat liberation movement. And I also am not always formally scholarly about that. So I do come to you with degrees behind my name. None of them are in fat studies. None of them are in history. None of them are in, American studies or some of the areas where I might be formally educated in fat stuff. So the fat stuff I've gathered through community, through reading, through other kinds of media. So I'm going to share with you 4 kind of key moments in the history of the organized, documented fat liberation movement. And then I'm just going to let y'all ask questions about whatever is most interesting to you. But I like to ground folks in those moments because a lot of people are frankly just unfamiliar with that history. I also, before I say those 4 moments, like to point out that, again, this is the documented history of the organized fat liberation movement. This is not everything important fat people ever did in life. These are not the first time that fat people did important things for social justice movements, for each other's rights, for other people's rights. We know that people were living their badass, fat ass best lives, or the best lives that were possible in their time frames as fat people before these moments that I'm going to talk about. And we also, I want you, as we talk about these moments, to think about who is not in these moments and why they might not be in these moments. So who's missing from this history and where were they? What were they doing instead? It wasn't just, we don't care enough about fat people to be thinking about this. It was, we care a lot about some other stuff that we're thinking about and doing. I think that'll all make sense as I talk about it a little bit more. I'm mostly hoping to get through this chunk of these 4 pieces without questions along the way, and then I'll take all the questions you have. But absolutely, if there's something I've said that's confused you or that's raised something for you that you feel like you can't go on to the next piece without getting that solved, please put your question in the chat so that Crystal or I can point it out. Okay, so, and also if you're somebody who's much more of a visual learner, there is a slideshow along with this in the video that's already on YouTube. So you can go back and watch that and you can see some of these things kind of being presented a little bit more strategically than right now.
And Ashley did put that link to that video in the chat.
Great, thank you. So the 4 sort of pillars of the documented fat rights movement. The first thing that happens is in 1967, a radio DJ named Steve Post in New York City creates an event called the Fat Inn in Central Park. And there are not a lot of surviving records of the Fat Inn. The most commonly cited documentation of it is a small piece that ran in the New York Times with no photos that talks that is titled "Fatties." It's called something like "Fat People Have Their Day in the Park" or something. And there's a quote from Steve Post about his intention in forming this day, and that article cites that there were about 500 people that showed up in the spirit of sit-ins, in the spirit of peace-ins, love-ins, be-ins. That these people showed up to have a fat in the park with the idea that we don't have to feel guilty about being fat. Today we would call this fat visibility, right? We're going to just show up and be fat in a public place. And that in and of itself is a form of activism. So this is a really galvanizing moment for some folks. So that's 1967. And thinking about the 1960s in the United States and across the globe and what kind of social justice movements were happening and unfolding in these times. Keep that in mind as part of the context. So 1967, the Fat In, as the first sort of documented fat visibility fun protest project. There are other fat groupings before this, right? Like there are fat men's social groups in New York in the, I think, 1920s, and there are things like that, but they're not so much about the fatness. They're not about this like a political statement about fatness. And so the Fat In is documented, is widely cited as like one of the first galvanizing moment. And then the next year in 1967, in the Saturday Evening Post, which is one of the most major publications of its time, and of course, a publication in a time when publications are the kings of media, right? There's not all this other multimedia in the way that we experience information now. So the Saturday Evening Post is hugely important as a literary document of the times and also as a pop culture document of the times. Many of you will know it from like Norman Rockwell paintings and things like that. The Saturday Evening Post runs an article by an author named Lou Louderback, and the article is contributed, his wife Anne also contributes to the article, and it is called "More People Should Be Fat." And the premise is, if people just let themselves be in their natural bodies, instead of being on this hamster wheel of dieting, trying to force themselves to be thin, then there would be more fat people in the world. So it's not actually advocacy. It's not more people should be fat in the form of advocating for more people to get fat. It is a statement that there just should be fat people in the world. And the reason that we don't see as many of them as we would naturally is because we're doing unnatural things to try to, because of our obsession with thinness and dieting. So that's 1968. And in 1969, in 1968, this young engineer from New York, who is very passionate about his fat wife and very concerned about the things that he sees his fat wife, Joyce, enduring in the world. This young engineer, Bill Fabry, who some of you may be familiar with and who is, I see in the chat with us today, hi, Bill, writes away to Lou, as one did at that time, and says, can we meet up? Can I talk to you? I'm making copies of your article and handing them out to people. And again, remember, making copies was not just some common thing that we easily did. Like, he didn't just run down to the corner Kinko's to make copies, right? So it's a big deal. Bill is making copies of this article, handing them out to people in his community, and he writes away to Lou and says, we should start some kind of group to help fat people out because the world is unjust. And so they do that. And so in 1969, we have the first meeting of NAFA, which at the time was called the National Association to Aid Fat Americans. And the group that met there at that first meeting designated Bill Fabry as the leader and founder of NAFA. So in the same summer as the Stonewall Rebellion and the Alcatraz occupation and the moon landing and the creation of Sesame Street, which is always one of my favorite ones to mention, in that same summer, NAFA is born, becoming the first documented organized fat rights group. And those three things sort of operate in tandem, right? They're all raising people's awareness, people are experiencing them, and then they kind of come together in the form of NAFA. The other pillar for me, when I think about the four kind of key things in the beginning of fat activism, is actually the branch away from NAFA. So NAFA forms, and it's got social aspirations, it's got socio-political aspirations, it's got civil rights aspirations, but what it doesn't have is the same radical feminist spirit as some of the other women who want to be doing this work. And there are women who are involved in the early days of NAFA, who want to think and talk more radically about the work. And some of those women stay involved with NAFA even as they go on to do other radical work, and some of them just branch off and do their own things, forming these feminist collectives in different parts of the country. And the most notable of those, the most well-documented of those, is the Fat Underground. If you're totally unfamiliar with the Fat Underground, I will tell you that there is historical, like, archival footage of the Fat Underground available on YouTube, free and accessible to everybody. And one of the things that the Fat Underground formed in the Los Angeles area, many of those women are later also associated with the Bay Area, the San Francisco area. And the Fat Underground meets for a while and starts doing work and starts encouraging other feminist organizations to bring fat politics into their discussion of gender and feminism. And then in 1972 releases a document that they called the Fat Liberation Manifesto. And the Fat Liberation Manifesto is a multi-point document that basically says, like, we're not going to keep taking this crap from the diet industry. The medical establishment is a bunch of liars. They lie about everything when it comes to fat people and health. The forces in Madison Avenue, the people in advertising, are creating images of about fat and about thinness that are not true and that are detrimental to all of us. And we see this as in alignment with we see our work and our struggle as in alignment with the struggles of other oppressed groups, racial minorities, gender minorities, sexual orientation minorities, and so on. And that minorities, the term that would have been used at the time. And so you can find the actual, like, verbatim Fat Liberation document in many places on the internet. Just Google Fat Liberation Manifesto and you will find it. I think we have a link to it on the NAFA website under our history section as well. But what's important about this is it's sort of, it's the political foundation of what we think of as the fat liberation movement now. And it's the root of why we use the terminology fat liberation. So the size acceptance movement grows. NAFA grows, develops chapters all over the country, starts hosting big conventions, which are amazing places for people to socialize. You know, so many fat people don't have the experience of being in collective space with other fat folks. Especially not with other politicized fat folks or unapologetic fat folks, or even people who aspire to be politicized and unapologetic. So the social piece of NAFA is incredibly important. And NAFA is also doing advocacy work all over the country, creating resource documents for people, doing protest work. I mean, in the 90s, you see activists from NAFA protesting at the White House and protesting at obesity conferences and protesting at LAX because of airline policies around seat size and things like that. So you see some of that work coming out of NAFA, and the social piece is also important. And some of the social pieces that we see the threads of throughout what we now call body positivity and throughout what we do as fat liberation activists and fat visibility activists now is that you know, there are things like the first fat fashion shows and the first fat pool parties, and just those gatherings of fat people in social ways. That's not the heart of what we do all the time with NAFA now. There are other organizations do that. There are whole networks of, you know, plus size bashes and fashion events and other places that do that. But a lot of it starts in spaces like NAFA chapter events or NAFA's national events. And in the meantime, the feminist organizations do not, like the Fat Underground, the New Haven Collective, there was a Boston Collective, like there are all these feminist groups. They are networked with each other, but not in a formal umbrella the way that NAFA chapters are. And, you know, but they're writing letters to each other. They're doing phone calls with each other. They're traveling across country to attend feminist events and conferences with each other. And so the longevity of those women and femmes and their legacy is there, even though there wasn't a constant counter running. Like we, at NAFA, we get to say, you know, we get to claim the 52-year continuity. but there's continuity of radical fat feminism from the beginning of the movement through now. It's just not under the umbrella of one organization. So those are the four things. And then, yeah, I see people in the chat pointing out like no internet, no internet. Think about what that means compared to how we connect with each other literally today, right? We're all here on Zoom, but also today in this sort of bigger picture, the ways that we find each other online. Earlier today, for those of you who weren't here, Marina Hayes from Peridot Robes was talking about learning later about things that she wished she had known at the time. She was talking specifically about Deb Malkin and Redress as, you know, as sort of a really important organization in the world of fat fashion that she didn't learn about until Redress was already gone. Today, it's more likely that, you know, somebody would have bought something at Redress and put it on TikTok and it lands in somebody else's hand, or, you know, like it lands in somebody else's lap or on somebody else's screen. And so we have these networking capabilities that we didn't have at the time. And the third wave, so fat activism kind of has three waves, right? The first wave is those pillar moments that I'm talking about from the 60s and 70s. And again, these are moments, oh, maybe I didn't actually say this explicitly. Those first three moments are cisgender white men, right? Straight white men. And the Fat Liberation Manifesto comes out of the Fat Underground, which is a very intersectionally aware organization. And it is predominantly from all of what I can gather from the historical documents and from anecdotes from folks, it's predominantly white and Jewish cisgender women, predominantly. They're and so where's everybody else? Everybody else is, first of all, left out of the history sometimes, and we're doing some work. I'm doing some work to collect oral histories to kind of like dig out some of the names and faces of people who were there at the beginning, but we weren't thinking about intersectionality or talking about diversity or thinking about inclusion in the same ways. So we weren't noting them in the ways that we might note them now, or we were color blinding ourselves in ways that we wouldn't now because we would want to be more identity aware. And so sometimes when we look at the historical documentation of fat liberation, it looks really white, it looks really straight, it looks really cisgender, and that's not always the true story. But also, sometimes it is the true story of those particular moments. And it's because those other people were doing things like leading the Stonewall Rebellion or leading the Black American Civil Rights Movement, or, you know, doing other things in other social justice spaces where they were bringing their fat identity and sometimes some fat politic into what they were doing, but fat politic wasn't their primary form of activism. So part of what we want to do here in the third going into fourth wave of fat activism, because we have that historical period as the first wave. The second period is sort of the like the early internet expansions of things. It's message boards and listservs and things like that to help connect people. And it's NAFA continuing to grow and it's new organizations starting. And then the third wave really is the sort of like what we think of as the contemporary body positivity era. It's the social media era.
Your connection might be slowing down.
I
think your connection might be slowing down a little bit.
Oh, I see you freezing and I thought it was you. Sorry.
Okay. Maybe it's me.
So if I'm going fast and my connection is going slow, folks, sorry if you're missing things on this end, but again, there's a more formal presentation about this stuff that's already available on YouTube. So I think, you know, as we enter this sort of fourth wave, right, we're in this intersectionally focused era of fat liberation activism, not just at NAFA. And I would actually say NAFA is not even not the leader of that. Other organizations began to think about these things before NAFA did. But organizations thinking about how to be accessible to all the fat people, how to be welcoming to all the fat people, not just the fat people who showed up, but are we thinking about why other people didn't show up? Where other people are, and what we're doing that is not relevant to them, and so what we need to be doing instead, because fat liberation has to be fat liberation for everybody. And so where where did we think we were getting it right in terms of accessibility, but really we were leaving a lot of disabled people out? Where did we think we were being welcoming in terms of to LGBTQIA plus people, and really we thought we were welcoming to them, but they didn't think we were welcoming to them? Where did we think we were really friendly to people of color, but maybe we were only friendly to the people of color we wanted to date and not all the other people of color? Like, where are those, how do we suss out where those problems were in our history and do better going forward? So that's like kind of where we are now. And I think like at this point, I just want to see what y'all want to know about. Like, I will tell you things I know. I will tell you whether it's my actual knowledge or it's just my opinion. And I will tell you what I don't know so we can find it out together.
Would you mind starting off talking about the difference between size acceptance and fat liberation, or fat? Yeah, I guess. And I know BOPO, okay, I think most of us are over that term, but maybe you can describe that one too.
Sure. So, you know, as I said, NAFA started out as the National Association to Aid Fat Americans and is now the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. So we actually still officially use the term acceptance as an organization, and we have no plans right now to change our organization name for a variety of reasons. But we use the term fat liberation to talk about what we do. We use the term fat rights to talk about what we do a lot. And I think that the difference is acceptance sounded a lot like asking people for permission. I think there are a lot of activists who, I can't tell if I'm freezing or you guys are.
I don't know. I'm turning off my video. You keep going, see what happens.
Okay. Acceptance carries an implication that that you have to, that other people have to like it in order to for us to live our best lives. Like it's got the same sort of connotation that tolerance has for many people. Like it's we want something, we want you to accept us. Whereas liberation is more like, we're gonna be who we're gonna be, and that's your problem if you don't like it. I mean, that's the way I think of it, is like, fat liberation is also just a more politicized term. It's a term that agitates people who have privilege, that aggravates people who have privilege and makes them have to think about their privilege. Acceptance is easier. It's you know, it's easier to say like, that it's fine if you do what you do, but do it over there. That's not the same thing as celebration. When I was running my nightclub event and started to think about that term, we went from using the term size acceptance to using the term size celebration, because what we wanted to be doing was centering fat people and celebrating fat people, not just saying like, oh, I guess it's okay if you're fat. But like, no, it's actually really fucking awesome if you're fat, because you are really fucking awesome. So your fat is just part of that. And so for me, and for I think a lot of activists, the term liberation it has more of that intersectional commitment. It has more of a requirement that you think about what freedom means and who has access to it and how you're allowed to declare it for yourself, and what the barriers are when you declare it for yourself to it actually coming to fruition. I think also it connects us with that really bold and unapologetic stance of the fat underground. And there was no, in Charlotte Cooper's book on fat activism, Charlotte Cooper is a British scholar who did a lot of research on global fat activism, but includes a lot of the development of US fat activism in her book Fat Activism. And she quotes from somebody who talks about, like, in the early days that that there would be NAFA groups that would do things like, we're going to volunteer at the elderly care facility because we want to show everybody else that fat people are nice people, we're good people, and so they should be nice to us. Whereas the women in the fat underground were like planning to break into some professor's office and steal their obesity research or something like that, right? There's a way in which using the term liberation connects us to that more radical politic. And yeah, there is, so I I think that's all I have to say about the difference in those terms. When it comes to body positivity, Crystal said, a lot of us are just over the term BOPO, and I think that's true. I think a lot of people who have dedicated their lives to fat activism see the ways that body positivity started out as being really forwarded by the work of fat people, Black women and femmes, other queer identified folks, disabled folks, folks who have experience with like amputees or folks who have disfigurements, or other kinds of people who really were on the margins of what is an acceptable body. And at the outer edges of those margins. And as body positivity mainstreamed and moved more towards the middle, it's the people who are barely on the margin of what's acceptable who get all the attention in the world of body positivity. And some of that is because of the whole entire world's internalized stuff, right? The ways in which, as we work through our own stuff about all of these isms and oppressions, we still sometimes have aspiration to being closer to the center. It's what Reagan talked about. If you were not here for Reagan's session during the last hour, she talked about, gaining access to privilege by becoming smaller. There can be something aspirational, I think, for some folks about following the body positive person who is, oh, I love my body, but their body's not that challenging to the status quo. So some of it is our internalized stuff, but most of it is just the forces of capitalism, right? Like, if you've already got a whole world that's internalized all these things and you want to sell them stuff, you can sell them more stuff by utilizing the people who look most like what they used to admire, than by utilizing the people who don't. And so there's a variety of reasons why body positivity has been like co-opted or watered down. I think there are people who still identify with that term because it's where they started in the movement, and they want to embrace and encourage other people to embrace a more radical vision of body positivity. Their intention was always that body positive meant intersectional and inclusive and everybody's bodies, all the rebel bodies. And so even if they happen to be themselves closer to the inside circle, they still had radical intentions. And so they want to, they want to reclaim body positivity as what they intentionally wanted it to be. I think there are folks who still want to use the term that way. And then I think there are other folks who just use the term because it sounds good and it's popular and it sounds nicer than being mean to other people. And we don't want to shame anybody, even though we kind of do. So we declare ourselves as body positive, and it doesn't require that we think about the politics as much.
Tigress, can you talk a little bit about your perspectives, how you got to where you are, like who were your early people that like kind of shared them with your sorry, I can't talk, who shared their perspective and you kind of took it in, like how did you kind of get to be where you are?
So a few things for me happened. The chronology is kind of, I first encountered NAFA. I most likely first encountered NAFA on the Donahue show. I would see, on Donahue and other talk shows of my coming of age time, which was, the late 80s, early 90s. I would see these fat people on there and they'd be like, the rebel fatties. The question would always be something like, can you really love yourself as a fat person or something like that, right? And then there would be these like audacious fat people. I remember them always as being women and femmes, and that would, tell their stories of how like I'm fat, I have sex, I have love, I have all the things that you think you can't have as a fat lady, and here I am wearing these loud ass colors and all the things, right? And so I would see those folks on places like Donahue. And then I went away to college at Smith College, and it's, it's a women's college with a lot of feminist connections. And I heard Gloria Steinem speak in my first year. I heard Bell Hooks speak in my first year. And I had, it was more exposure to feminist politics in general than I had received growing up in, a small town in Arizona. And it was also there was a woman who worked at my college named Carrie Hemingway, who was very active in the Boston chapter of NAFA. And she did a workshop. I actually discovered recently that this workshop was on my 18th birthday. I didn't remember that detail. But so my, my entry point into adulthood officially was the same day that I first encountered a person in real life who was part of NAFA and who was just talking about what it meant to just say I'm fat as a matter of fact thing, and then live your life as though that's just a thing you do. There was BBW magazine, Big Beautiful Woman magazine. Before that term was so widely used as like a personal ad and adult industry kind of term, and nightlife term. I first encountered it as that fashion magazine for fat women who they never would have used the word fat in BBW magazine. I don't remember ever seeing the word fat in that magazine. So NAFA was really my first encounter with using the word fat. Carrie was the first person I think I heard in life use the word fat in a just completely descriptive and sometimes proud way. And then but I didn't get involved with NAFA for years. I started my nightclub event. I started hearing about these plus size nightclub events, these BBW parties, and I wanted to check one out. The first one I went to was Big Boogie Nights in the San Francisco area. Then there was another club in the area called Sexy at Every Size. And I was, I was putting my toe as a late bloomer to going out to clubs and stuff. So I was in my early 30s putting my toe into nightlife. And what I was finding is, and I was a smaller fat then than I am now. And I was also, as you can see, I'm a light-skinned mixed race Black woman. And I was finding that there were times when I wasn't welcome, and that when I was welcome, it seemed to be based in some of that colorism stuff. And that often in plus size nightlife, there was a desire to see Black men present, but there wasn't a lot of desire to see Black women present. And so I started a club of my own in Oakland. And like I said earlier, when I started my club, I wanted to have some politics behind my club because I was doing, equity and justice work by day. And there was some nasty competition between some of the other nightclub promoters in my area, and I wanted to avoid that. The fashion women who were on earlier, Marcy from the Plus Bus and Marina from Peridot Robes, talked about like wanting to have more options for fat people. And one of the things I wanted when I started my club was for it to be another club, not for it to like, I'm not here to drive anybody else out of business or like, I'm here to we don't have to only have 2 parties a month. We could have 3 or 4 parties a month. And so I did my parties on Friday nights so that I would never be in competition with the other 2 clubs that were doing Saturday nights. And anyway, I thought about the politic pieces a lot, and I added something to my value statement, mission and values for my club about like what we want to do is throw the hottest party on Friday night, and then what are we going to do the rest of the week that has to do with supporting size acceptance, and we're going to figure out what those things are. So we did a lot of fashion stuff, and the fashion stuff led me to being invited to produce a fashion show at NAFA. So that was my path into being directly involved with NAFA many years after I first encountered it. Along the way, I would also give shout outs to 2 books, Marilyn Wan's Fat So, fat exclamation point, so question mark, and Laura Fraser's Losing It, which is a journalistic investigation of the diet industry, which was the first time I really read somebody doing critical analysis on like what is wrong with this industry, the kind of stuff that Reagan just did, but I haven't revisited that book in the modern era. So I do remember that there was it still ended with some sort of like, here are healthier ways to try to lose weight, not like F you to the whole weight loss idea. But it was like the first sort of critical read on that for me. And I think, Crystal, I saw a question in the chat about ASDA. I don't know if that person wants to come on mic and ask the question. Yeah, maybe. I think it was Jenna. I don't mean to call you out. I can just read it if you don't want to.
No, it was me. Like talking about the history of this movement, it would be neat to know kind of how ASDA and NAFA developed, and like many other organizations, there's usually like someone's perspective that maybe divides a community, and I don't want to talk about like I'm not like asking this like for gossipy reasons, but more of like I wonder why there's like two organizations, and is one, you know, strictly for promoting health at every size, rather than like fat acceptance. So I just would love to hear about that.
So there are a couple of things that I can say about that. I'm not an expert on the early days of ASDA, but what I can tell you is that, first of all, for those who don't know ASDA is the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health, and it is a professional organization for practitioners, for health and wellness practitioners who work from a health at every size philosophy. And ASDA is actually the trademark holder of health at every size, the term HAES, health at every size, in part because it was important to get somebody to have that trademark so nobody else could co-opt that phrase. They still try to do it, but they actually can be challenged because it's trademarked. But ASDA and the history of health, there's a really great documentation of the history of health at every size written by Barbara Altman Bruno, who is, a past NAFA board member and a founding member of ASDA. And it's available through the NAFA blog. We've republished it. I think it's also on ASDA's website, probably asdah.org. And so Barbara traces that whole history. And one of the things that brought about the creation of ASDA was that many of these, many activists who were practitioners, especially in eating disorder space and other healthcare spaces, were part of a listserv called Show Me the Data. And those people were at the root of the formation of ASDA. So ASDA was not like a break off from NAFA. They're really kind of two different organizations with slightly different purposes. And again, ASDA provides a lot of professional support for people who are working in those industries. Not all of them are fat people. There are, many of them are fat positive allies who want to work in a health at every size framework. I think that, and I don't want to say that any organization is really a break off from NAFA. Even the Fat Underground, which in some ways is a break off from NAFA, right? Because some of those women were involved in NAFA and then went a different direction. There are points of contention, right? There are points of contention around feminism. There are points of contention around gender. There are points of contention around health practices. Like, there are all these points of contention across these 53 years of movement. But like, I feel like it inappropriately centers NAFA to make it sound like everything starts with NAFA until people break off from NAFA. Because people start their own stuff because it's what they need. It's not necessarily a reaction to what NAFA is or is not doing, right? I don't see No Lose, which started as a fat lesbian organization, as like the lesbians thought NAFA sucked, so they started their own organization. I see it as like the lesbians needed an organization. Okay, NAFA wasn't going to be it. We don't need NAFA. We can make our own stuff, right? So it's like it's a slight difference in how you sort of orient to the development of these other organizations. But I don't want it to ever feel like NAFA is the grand elder, so everything else is a branch off of NAFA. That feels incorrect to me. But also it is accurate that there was not a great lesbian space in NAFA, right? Like there was a feminist caucus. I think at various points in NAFA's history, there have been groups for gay and lesbian folks in that more binary way. But there was never like a consistent support in that way. And there have always been, health practitioners and health and wellness practitioners involved in NAFA, dietitians and nutritionists and all those folks. But it was never a professional organization for them, So some of it is just this development of meeting different needs. There was some fracturing in NAFA in the 90s around some board politics stuff. That was a pretty major fracturing. And some of it had to do with movement politics, and some of it had to do with interpersonal politics between the people that were involved. So that is the timing at which the Council on Size and Weight Opportunity was formed. But I think there are other opportunities to hear Bill talk about how and why he formed that. What I will say about the groups working together is one of the things that's most exciting to me that happened in my first year as NAFA chair is that we convened a group last year of the leaders of NAFA, ASDA, No Lose, which is the organization I mentioned before, which is no longer an explicitly lesbian organization. It's now a queer-centered organization that's open to other folks. The Fat Women of Color, which is a social networking space for fat women of color, just like it sounds like. The FLAIR, which is the Fat Legal Advocacy and Rights Education Project, and Nobody is Disposable. We all met together, and it was the first time that there'd ever been this sort of like council of leaders. It was the first time that anybody can remember, or there's nothing documented anywhere if there's been a time that happened before. So I feel really excited about the sort of major national groups thinking more about how to work together. That's so I'm really happy that is a thing that we are doing now, that we are keeping going.
I don't mean to, that's amazing. I don't mean to change the direction entirely, but back to the Phil Donahue thing and the audacious fatties that were on the Phil Donahue show. I'm hoping Carol might share with us her comment that she made in the chat.
Yeah, the Donahue show that several people have talked about. There's been more than one. I remember there was a time when NAFA was on it too. But the group I was in was called Fat Lip Readers Theater, and it started in '81 as a group of 10 women, 9 lesbians, 1 straight woman. And they started a readers theater to educate people around fat, but in a entertainment, sometimes funny, sometimes sad way. And there were 3 Fat Lip members that were on Donahue in, I can't remember what year it was now, but it was early in Fat Lip's history. It was Judy Free Spirit, Nancy Thomas, and Louise Wolf, who unfortunately have all passed on in the last few years. But Judy was the largest of the people up on stage at the time. And one of the audience members asked, it's like, you want me to believe that you can have sex, that you have sex? And she was like, oh, honey, you should only have it so good. And if you knew Judy, she could deliver that line like, and that we actually put that in our script for years, which is why it sticks in my head, because it was, we use that a lot. And the audience just cracked up because and just knowing Judy personally, I can tell you that was true. She was a very popular woman in her younger years. She wrote about it in her books. This is not
sure.
tales. Yeah, this is stuff she's documented about herself.
I always say, where there's a will, there's a way.
Oh gosh, yes.
Well, and it doesn't take as much will as some people imagine that.
No, I know it doesn't.
Like we need to. This is one of the interesting things we need to be realistic about where our physical fat creates barriers for us, and we also. So I'm reluctant sometimes to like dispute when people have like crazy or like false. I shouldn't say crazy, false ideas about where fat is a barrier and it's not. Like sometimes I'm reluctant to dispute that because I don't want to just sound defensive about it. We need to be realistic. And, as Reagan pointed out in the last session, there are aids available to us. And Marina pointed out the doggy style strap. I mean, there are all kinds of aids to us if our physicality is a challenge to things that we want to be doing, right? And also, I always say, I hate it when they, capital T, when they tell lies on us. It is like this idea. I think there are cultural ideas around like fat and kind of like monstrosity or something that make people imagine that we don't just do regular stuff that other human beings do, right? We have sex. It may or may not require accommodations. And if it does require accommodations, there's no shame in that. But right. Also the idea that that's the only possible way that we could have sex is patently ridiculous, right? So, and is usually, invented, I think. Someone else mentioned like, I think it was Reagan talking about the MRIs, that people will be like, so you expect us to make an MRI machine that will, and they say they fill in a number, right? And they think that number is astronomical.
250.
And half the time that number is smaller than the person they're talking to, because right. People who haven't lived at those weights can't conceptualize of those weights in these ways that are not these like Jabba the Huttish kind of ways that they've been taught by popular culture.
Right.
And it's ridiculous, right? Like it's, fat people at any part of the spectrum, first of all, are still human. They are not Jabba the Hutt. but we all have a variety of different, you know, a variety of different physicalities, and what people attach to the numbers versus what the numbers, how the numbers actually match up to us, if we were looking at them as just mere fact and not these things that were loaded with all of these other, you know, barriers and medical nonsense or whatever. If they were just mere facts, right, it still would seem like people can't match the factual information, because that's how little we get the actual factual information.
Yep.
Sorry, that was a little bit of a rant. I see Reagan has a hand up.
Yeah, Reagan has a question.
I'm not sure if I've missed any other ones in the chat either, Crystal, if you can
I'll check.
Help me check. Go ahead, Reagan.
Oh, I just wanted to say yes to all of that, and just add that, like, I think part of it is that diet culture encourages us to blame everything that goes wrong in our lives on our size. So like whereas people of all sizes might be dealing with whatever the situation is, we're like, oh, well, it must be because we're fat.
Right.
And how much like that's a diet culture mind. But like you hear people, I'm sure happens to you too, and they're like, I just want to get back to that weight when I felt best. I'm like, when was that? I was 18. How old are you now? 57. Okay. Like, I think
maybe some of those things are not your weight.
You're not your size. Yeah. Ask other people your age. But anyway, sorry not to hijack, but yeah, thank you for talking about this.
Thank you for adding that point. And that's the other, that's the other thing that happens is like, it is anti-fatness that makes thin people not want to access the kinds of aids that they could be getting, that they don't want to be perceived as, oh, I needed that, like the fat girl needed that, or the fat person needed that, right? So maybe you also need a doggy a doggy style strap to get your freak on. Maybe that would also help you because of some mobility issue you have or some flexibility issue you have, but you don't want to get it because you think that's only for the fat people. You don't want to be associated with us. Girl, get your strap and be associated with us and get your freak on and have a good time, right? Like, or whatever. Like some of what I think often people who thin people who are potential allies, they don't realize, and we don't realize, how much anti-fatness is what prevents them from associating, right? And prevents them from living their best lives. And that's why they get mad at us when we are unapologetically fat, when we are audacious enough to demand what we deserve and what we need and what we desire, because how dare we? We're the thing they're supposed to be afraid of.
Right.
That's also why they inspiration porn us, like that, that term inspiration porn, where people look at you and like, oh, I could never. You're my inspiration because you're so tremendously fat. So I must be able to do that in my 10-pound over whatever I think is the limit. Like, it's also so that there's an exotification that can happen there. Sure. But there's also just a confusion that can happen there. Like, they just can't process, how could you do it? Right. And that is one of the things about when you look at fat activist history, it's easy for us to look back at places, especially along NAFA's spectrum, and say NAFA was really moderate or NAFA was really conservative compared to other things. And like, compared to the fat underground, yes, NAFA is conservative. Compared to the world, NAFA is radical AF, right?
Yes. Yeah.
It was, always has been, always will be, because just the audacity to declare that fat people should be allowed to be is radical in the culture where everything teaches you that fat people should not be allowed to be.
And to give up dieting, that's so radical, right? That's you.
It's a huge form of cultural participation, whether you quote unquote need to lose weight or not. It's sort of like, once upon a time, I smoked clove cigarettes. And it was like an entryway into a particular like social world, because all I had to do was ask someone for a lighter, right? That's how talking about diets works. And it's equally poisonous. That's how talking about diets work. You can be in a room with somebody you don't know at all. And if y'all start talking about how the cookies have too many calories, you can bond, right? I don't want to bond over that. Right? Tell me something interesting about you. We'll eat the cookies or don't, whatever. But like, can we talk about something fun over the cookies instead of just ruining these cookies by talking about all the ways they're gonna make us look like me? Like, can we not do that? But it's an easy shortcut to social connection in our culture because it's so pervasive. Everybody understands it. Everybody understands it. And so, you know, one of the things about when I think about the history of our organizations and our movement and our individual activists who've always been, as Marilyn Wan says, free range fat rebels.
Yeah.
You know, part of what is distressing is that the same things that people were bringing up 50 years ago, you can look at a NAFA newsletter from 1970, you can see some of the same shit that we're dealing with now. You can look at, there was a CBS report on NAFA in I think it's from the early 80s. It's available on YouTube, on CBS's YouTube. And other than the fashion, that could be that we could have shot that at the 50th anniversary conference of NAFA 2 years ago. You know, it's the same. We're talking about the same stuff. And in some ways that feels like we just haven't made enough progress. Well, the greater culture hasn't made enough progress, right? But the more we understand that this is not the first time we're talking about it, the more likely we are to utilize each other as resources to learn from the wisdom of the grand elders who went before us, or the middle elders who went before us. Like, I'm auntie status now, y'all. I'm not one of the youngsters. Well, I mean, to the grand elders, I'm one of the youngsters, and to the youngsters, I'm one of the elders, right? And so that sort of multi-generation perspective on how we navigate this stuff, where it is better and how it got to be that way, where it's not better and where we've come up against walls already, so maybe we can learn to go around those walls instead of just banging our head against those same walls. Like, that multi-generational connection is really important. It makes me feel really good to see that there are folks here in the chat who were there in some of the things that I'm talking about.
Yes.
And there are folks here in the chat who've never heard of these people. Sure. And need to hear more from them. So I just encourage you to, those of you who are still with us for this session, thank you for being here. And we have this blessing of new books and media and and TikToks and YouTube videos and all of these things about fat world, but also go back to the root ones sometimes. Get yourself a copy of Shadow on the Tightrope and read those writings while you also read Deshawn's book and Sabrina's book that other people have mentioned.
I'm so grateful for all of the elders and all of the work that all of you have done, and everybody here and people that aren't here. It's just so amazing, because I wouldn't be able to do what I do without them, and they've done so much, and I'm just so appreciative and so grateful, because I would be lost without it, and I'm sure a lot of you feel that same way.
I was lucky. I mean, those of us who came of age as activists in the Bay Area are lucky, because there is already a multi-generational activist collective there, right? Because so many people who were in those radical feminist groups, things like Fat Lip that Carol mentioned, or like women and femmes from the Fat Underground who relocated to the Bay, or there people like Marilyn, who in that second wave of activism were some of the greatest spokespeople for fat rights movement, and people like Sally Smith. And all of those people who were in the Bay or near the Bay, we've all had a chance to interact with. People who are in other parts of the country don't always get that multi-generational opportunity, because the fat group where they live, if they're lucky enough for there to be one, started 3 years ago, not 30 years ago, right? So the internet is a great resource for us to be able to cross-share that way. And if you are somebody who's with us now or who's watching this later, and you have stories to tell from those from those multiple points in this 5-decade history, and nobody's collected your stories, please reach out to me, because I love to talk to y'all about the things that came before me, and about the things that came simultaneously to me but were in different parts of the country, so I didn't know about them, or different parts of the world. We can be very US focused when we talk about the history of fat activism, and it's because some of those key moments happened here. There are also key moments in London. There are also key activists in Sweden. There are also, people in the Netherlands doing amazing work, people in Brazil doing amazing work. I think this year, later in the year, we're going to do a little bit of a focus in our NAFA webinar series on international activists and expose you to some of those folks. But if you have suggestions, please let me know.
Interesting.
All of the stories, both as the chair of NAFA and as just me, a middle-aged fat lady trying to, trying to be enriched by the other people. I'm very interested in the stories that are missing from the documented history. So if you are part of those stories, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can reach out to me through the NAFA website. You can reach out to me through any of the social media that I'm on.
Instagram, Facebook.
Instagram,
TikTok.
Facebook. In most places, I'm I of the Tigress. Letter I, O of the Tigress. And I'm Tigress Osborn, and my real name is already out on the internet, so you can find me. I'm easy to find. If you have a story to tell, or if you have somebody to sort of nominate as like, I should be hearing their story, we should be telling more of their story, please do reach out.
Great idea. Thank you. Does anybody else have any last questions for Tigress? Any last
Thank you all for
comments?
staying. I know we started a little late, we're a little over. Positive last question. Who's got the last one and wants to ask a question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the elders that are here today. Thank you to the, what'd you call the middle people?
I don't know what I said.
Whatever they are.
Mid-elder. I don't know.
Mid-elder. I love it. I appreciate it. So then thank you all. I'm so glad you could all be here. We do have a feedback form because we want to know what you thought went well, what didn't go well. And we want to know if you have other ideas for speakers. There's definitely a few people on here that I would love to have. Maybe like 10 or 12 of you that I'd love to have on. Well, probably all of you. But thank you. Thank you to, I know Marcy's still here. And thank you to Tigress, and thank you to Reagan. I appreciate you. And hopefully also April Johnson, I wanted to tell you, I love your picture. Every time I was feeling bummed out about something we were talking about, I just look at your cute photo with your laugh, and it just kept bringing me joy. And thank you, Marcy. You're so awesome. Thank you to Plus Bus. And
thank you
to
guys.
Ashley.
It's been an amazing day,
Thank you.
so fulfilling and interesting and fascinating. And I think there's just so much to discuss and talk about. And so, yeah, I definitely want to offer that, surgeon. I think she would be super down to do it.
Yeah.
And we'd probably all have to sign some sort of like, we're not taking medical advice or whatever, but she's awesome. And I was so impressed to know. It's exciting, like when we meet a surgeon or a doctorate or a lawyer, it's like people are doing awesome shit everywhere. So thank you guys.
Absolutely.
And I really do appreciate the elders for being here and all of the work that you have done, to get us to this point. And I'm excited to be, the part of the next generation that does that.
Yeah,
and I think that what the Plus Bus is fashion, but it is so much more. And that's like really our focus, is that we really are wanting to, be about the activism as well.
Thank you, Deb. Also, I really appreciate you. Thank you for your presentation today. And Ashley has one last thing. If you have a moment, please. Oh yeah, feedback survey that's in the chat, and then we'll put also in the email. Because I would love to know feedback, ideas for speakers. I think in the future, maybe I'll just do 3 speakers instead of 5, although this went extremely fast for me, but I think probably 5's too many, but we'll see.
Well, I'm grateful to those of you, who popped in late, or who, especially those of you who were here all day and hung out all the way to the end so that we could talk together about these things. And I just want to, I just want to say again, on behalf of everyone, that, that Crystal, we appreciate your labor in putting this together. It's not something that you had to do for us for this New Year's time. And Ashley, welcome to the show. And
she's great.
And thank you for your labor as well. And just everybody who worked on helping promote this and everything.
I'm so glad this was helpful for you, Gigi. And thanks for being here, Bill. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Tigress.
Oh, I guess I have to end it because I'm the host now. Bye, everybody.
That's right.